Hello, I'm Charles Bland. Today I'd like to discuss with you the concepts of communication theory and its role within society and its importance in providing defense of the Christian faith. Um, Dr. Dobson stated in his book Children at Risk that we as Christians are in the midst of a civil war of values, and that this civil war or attack on values permeates every aspect of society. It's a true statement. It's especially relevant when we consider that communication and communication theory also permeates every aspect of society. Uh, it also permeates every aspect of our daily lives. And it's also utilized by secular society to destroy the Christian worldview and utilized to erase essentially all relevance of truth and or the necessity of us as human beings to submit through faith to a higher authority, which we recognize as God. It's the attack on the Christian worldview within society that enables such concepts as modernism and postmodernism to be prevalent. And more importantly, it illustrates how truly important the role of communication is for us as believers in providing a defense of our faith. In the midst of the cultural war, there is an underlying theme, and that is that society desires and seeks out organization and personal control over their lives. Within society, there's a hunger for organizational control. There's a hunger for the management of our time, the management of our lives, and to be in charge. It's no different within the realms of today's organizations. In fact, organizations spend billions of dollars each year in teaching their leaders and their managers to be more effective at creating organizational control, exerting organizational control over the organizational member. Uh, Now, it's a necessity of having control within today's organization because most organizations that we find are indeed operating within a global market. And within those markets, there's a necessity for the organization as a whole to remain constantly flexible in order to meet market demands, flux, and deflux. And this then lends to the necessity of organizational communication because it's only through organizational communication that those leaders can adequately exert their control. Now, scholars will attest that organizational control is indeed found only through effective communication. One specific communication theory that lends itself to providing more adequate control over the organization is Weber's theory of bureaucracy. Now, Max Weber was a German sociologist, and he was predominantly interested in how humans achieve their goals through a rational process. Essentially, how said rational acts and individual drive and motivation can ultimately affect or influence social outcomes. Now, Weber's theory of bureaucracy has been championed for nearly a century now as the model that delivers the most rational and effective means of implementing control mechanisms within today's organizations. The success of Weber's theory essentially revolves around the cornerstone premise that organizational structures as a whole should be hierarchical and rule-driven. This is evidenced in some of the most successful organizations that we see around us that operate on that hierarchical, rule-driven concept or structure. Examples include the U.S. government, the U.S. military, and most global organizations as a whole. And the theory of bureaucracy, ultimately based upon that rule-driven concept and organizational control, is developed around bureaucracy, which operates based upon authority. Authority is essentially characterized in three ways: charismatic, traditional, and bureaucratic. And we recognize that authority is derived by power. Power is only recognized as being legitimate when it is delivered from the organization itself, i.e., putting someone in a leadership or authoritative position, whether as a foreman, as a manager, supervisor, whatever the case may be. Now, the theory of bureaucracy in relation to communication's role within the organization was defined by Weber's theory to be beneficial to the leader because it enabled the leader a medium by which to more fluently influence the organizational member. Communication itself was viewed as a managerial tool. It was utilized within the training of its employees and organizational members, and also utilized for enforcing standards, rules, regulations, and procedures within the organization. Communication was considered to be necessary, but was also deemed to be formal by nature, and traditionally was considered to be only effective if it was taught down, meaning it was not considered to be a two-way street. Now, the role of communication was essentially nothing more than another functional tool within the very rationalized set of procedures. Now, the disadvantage to Weber's theory is that it dehumanized the organizational member, meaning that leadership utilized the theory and utilized communication as a process of essentially telling people what to do and reckoning in a sense that they met the standard day in and day out in a very robotic fashion. It was a habitual process. And as such, you dehumanize a person because you eliminated the ability for there to be a relationship developed between leader and subordinate. Further, it took away the opportunity for the organizational member themselves to buy into the organization, to take ownership of the organization, and as such, that in itself deteriorates the advantages of Weber's theory. Now, the overlying idea of Weber's theory is sound, and it presents a legitimate form of control and certainly services as the communication theory as a foundation upon which legitimate organizational management and control can be built. What I liked about Weber's theory is that it provides us as a Christian an opportunity to illustrate a more underlying Christian message that I believe secular society as a whole misses completely. Now, but it's within this oversight that believers have the opportunity to utilize the seemingly secular theory of Weber's bureaucratic theory to communicate Christ to a lost world. We as Christians recognize that our God is a God of order, and as such, as we saw through Genesis chapters 1 and 2, when He created the world, a very organized and almost ingenious form of organization and structure. We also recognize from Exodus chapter 20 with the handing down of the Ten Commandments, God recognizing the necessity for His creation to have boundaries and to live by rules and to hold themselves accountable not only to God, but to man as well, and to authority established by God. And that's the key. That's the key as we begin to express our Christian worldview utilizing the secular theory, is that while there is a necessity for organizational control, there also is a recognition on our part as believers that all power and authority is delivered to man by God. As such, we then understand that at the end of the day, as believers, that our faith represents absolute truth, and that our truth is indeed internal. And we not only have a present-day responsibility to influence secular thought through the use of secular theories and the understanding of secular theories, but to utilize those openings as avenues to draw a lost world back to an understanding that legitimate power and that sound organizational leadership recognizes the necessity of moral law. We also have a greater obligation to ensure that we are proclaiming a truth that carries with it the internal responsibility that ultimately proclaims a path to salvation through Christ Jesus. We recognize from John 14 verse 6 that Jesus states that I am the way, the truth, and the life, and that no man comes to the Father except through me. If ever there was a call to action, if ever there was a need for us as Christians to recognize our necessity within the secular world and our necessity to defend the Christian faith and our Christian worldview, it is through that verse in which we ourselves, through our actions, illuminate the way to the Father, which is through Christ Jesus. It defines the necessity of a Christian worldview and the influence of our Christian worldview on all aspects of our life as well as on society. And of course we recognize that that in itself can only be accomplished through effective communication. Thank you.